The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. Controversy over the bail reform law that took effect on January 1st has not slowed down. The case of a man who was arrested a second time Friday night for aggressive panhandling just one day after he was arrested for allegedly slugging a 23-year-old woman in the face so hard that two of her teeth were knocked out became front page news. And there are other cases too. An Albany man who had been charged with bank robbery was released despite having committed 3 prior bank robberies. But advocates of the law have also dug their heels in, saying that it's too soon to make any judgments about the effectiveness of the law and that fear-mongering is not a way to make decisions on criminal justice reform. Tonight's guest is the Bronx DA, and we're going to talk with her about her own point of view on bail reform. We'll also ask her about the 2019 crime stats in the Bronx, the new NYPD Commissioner, combating the growing gang problem in the Bronx, and much more. Please join me in welcoming back to Bronx Talk the Bronx District Attorney, the Honorable Darcel Clark. DA Clark, nice to have you with us.
How are you? Thank you for having me again.
Well, let's start with this bail reform law. I'll just restate what you already know. The state eliminated bail for misdemeanors except for sex crimes and violating order of protection. Bail in pretrial detention is eliminated for most nonviolent felonies. What are your thoughts? And when you looked at that, did you go, oh no, this is going to make my job of keeping the Bronx safer harder? Or did you say this was a good thing?
I did not say it was going to make my job harder because even before this law came out, I was already, I had already changed my bail policies in my office. I taught my staff that if we were not seeking a jail sentence for someone, then we shouldn't be asking for jail for them to sit behind bars. So 2 years ago, I started doing that. So low-level, nonviolent cases where the person did not pose a threat to public safety, and I was not asking for, ultimately in the end game, a jail sentence, we were presumed ROR. So I had already been doing it.
Did you find the same kinds of things like, goodness gracious, we let somebody go who they came back to us very soon, or we had to then go chase them because they didn't come back to court? Or did you find it was a reasonable way of approaching criminal justice?
I found that it was a reasonable way of approaching it. You know, we have large numbers of people behind bars pre-trial, which means they haven't been convicted of anything, and they're in jail waiting for their trial. And some would say it's because these are people who are poor and couldn't make the bail. So I know that what the legislators intended was to level the playing field so that everyone would have a right to be out pending their trial, which is fine. But for those people who fail to come back to court, or if they're a danger to the community, those were the cases before the new reform that my office would ask for bail, especially if I was seeking a jail sentence. But going forward now with the new law, they have to automatically be released.
Does that take some of that discretion away from you and some of your assistant DAs?
It takes discretion, not so much from me, but from the court. The judges now don't have the discretion before. And you know, as a former judge, I know this very well. So that means the judges can't decide whether or not somebody should be held in pretrial or not, because the legislature has made it clear that a list of crimes, if they're charged, that there's automatic release.
The poster child case that people have thrown up, and you're well familiar with it, is the sad case of Khalif Browder, who ultimately the case was thrown out, but he did commit suicide after being in jail 2 years in solitary confinement and a total of 3 years. It was brought up in an article I read that had he been come in front of a judge in this case, he might have been denied the opportunity to post bail anyway and put into jail because he had priors. I thought that was kind of ironic that he's being held up as the poster child as to why we need the reform. On the other hand, he might have not qualified to begin with.
Well, I think the law was well-intentioned, and first and foremost, I'd like to say that what happened to Khalif Browder was a tragedy, and it was something that alerted the public and just society at large that we needed some reform in bail. As a district attorney, I believe that we needed reform in bail, but it needs to be evenly measured, and I think that the judges really should have the discretion to be able to determine whether or not someone should be held in on bail.
So, well, that brings up, I guess, the next step, so to speak. So a lot of talk is being made that, well, maybe not throw it out, but maybe take a look and give judges greater discretion. You believe that?
I think as
you're a former judge.
Yeah, I'm a former judge. I would say at any time that the judges should be able to exercise the discretion that they had. Look, the law is not perfect. A lot of laws are not perfect. I believe that there can be some tweaking that can happen, but I think one of the tweaks that should happen is I think that they should give back some discretion to the courts.
The whole notion of risk assessment by a judge is a slippery slope, because then you get back into, well, somebody might have been homeless and they kind of look like they, might have had a prior or been a dangerous person. As a judge, how do you evaluate that? How do you get yourself out of somebody's even, internal prejudice, or kind of trying to assess somebody, and get a sense of them? That becomes, as I say, a slippery slope, because then you can get back into the whole notion poor people end up going to jail, racism takes hold. What are your thoughts on that?
That is one of the drawbacks of risk assessments, that you end up just going right back to the same system that you already have. It's a challenge in order to really have a perfect law to deal with bail. It's difficult, but you have to think of what is the purpose of bail. The purpose of bail, in New York State at least, is to ensure that somebody comes back to court. Now, if we had a system where it's no bail, but we have services and things available to assist those people who are accused to make sure that they come back to court, then it will be fine. I mean, as a judge, it wasn't everybody warranted. People usually come back to court, and I think that's what they were trying to put forth, is a law that would even the playing field, so everybody, whoever was charged with the same crimes, were all treated the same way.
The gentleman Eugene Webb, who was put on the front page of at least 2 of New York's newspapers and was written about, he was the guy who had allegedly slugged a woman, and then brought in and then let go, and then allegedly again committed some other crime. Somebody had to go bring him back in. Does that concern you, the use of resources to go chase the people who don't come back? Now all of a sudden you got to make it a police matter again when you already had the person in hand? Well,
I think, unfortunately, the default is always the criminal justice system. So it's always NYPD and the DAs and the courts that have to intercede. What we're dealing with is a number of societal problems that if different agencies or different aspects of the government worked better on behalf of people, then they wouldn't be entering the criminal justice system in the first place. For example, the mental health of people play a large role in them entering the criminal justice system, and there's just not enough tools in the toolkit for the courts, for the DAs to really, and the police, to really deal with these individuals. So because there's nowhere to take them if they have mental health challenges or nothing can force them into it, then the default is call 911, the police come, whatever conduct that they're doing although it may be a behavioral health issue, being mental health, since there's no resources, it becomes NYPD, DA, courts, and Rikers.
Just as an aside, this brings up the old charge that we are always asking for the police to correct society's other ills, and later on in the program we'll talk about prevention, and you talk about mental illness. I mean, there's a whole dialogue about that, but I do want to stay with the law just a little bit. Should we expand the crimes that are exempted from the law, take a different look maybe, especially nowadays, at hate crimes or other things, and say, well, you know what, maybe these should be treated differently than other crimes?
Well, I think it was kind of rushed the way they came about the list.
Because of their interest in making sure that innocent people don't get incarcerated.
Absolutely, and that was a right reason to reform the laws. I was totally in favor of reforming the law, but I think there needs to be more dialogue as to which laws they really are. I mean, talk to the DAs and talk to the police.
Here we are.
We know the crimes that we charge most. You know, we have experience in this area, and sometimes, you know, people that don't work in the criminal justice system don't necessarily know the best way or what the impact is on the laws that they draft. So would there be others that I would like to add to the list? Yes, but I'm bound by the law that's here. I've charged my office and my assistants to work within the law, and we have readied ourselves for this new law, and we're doing what we have to do to follow it.
Not to put you on the spot, is there something you would suggest? You said there may be some other crimes.
Well, let's put it this way. I know that the hate crimes is prevalent right now. That's what's on the front pages right now. I would say hate crimes, but let's not look at just one crime because it's happening now. If they're going to sit down and look at it, I want them to sit down and look at all of the crimes, put all the stakeholders together, and really come out with a real reasoned and balanced law that would benefit everyone.
That was among the charges, that not enough people were interviewed beforehand, before the laws were crafted. I'm sure you would have something to say. You've already said what some of those things are here. Mm-hmm. You know, the law also completely rewrote the rules for pretrial discovery.
Yes.
The process where prosecutors let the defense know what evidence they have. You like this idea of being required to present all the evidence up front? Many people are concerned that witnesses could be intimidated and those kinds of things. Was this another good piece of this reform legislation?
I think discovery laws needed to be reformed as well. I would agree with it. I wouldn't necessarily agree with the timeline, especially for disclosing the information about witnesses. But I think that it's important that those who are accused have enough information before them, before they take pleas, to understand what the evidence is against them before they plead guilty. So I'm in favor of the discovery reform. I think that the artificial timeline of 15 days is just unrealistic. I mean, I'm doing everything I can to make sure we have everything that we have to the defense within the 15 days, but it's just not enough time. There's so many types of evidence that takes much longer than 15 days. We'll never be able to have it.
So is there a timeline of some sort, or do you step back from a timeline and say, in a general way, we need to have it by a certain time? I mean, why not? You and I, we could reform the legislation right now. But what would you suggest?
No, I mean, before, it could be, the law before was any time before a trial or a hearing, which I would agree was too late. It needs to be earlier, but 15 days is just unrealistic. I can't say the time frame. It was whenever we have stuff, we turn it over. But we have to be held accountable as DAs to make sure that we turn over the information so that defendants will have the ability to make informed decisions about their cases.
Let's talk a little bit about crime numbers. The city's annual homicide total surpassed 300 for the first time in a couple of years. But the Bronx seemed to do well in homicides. Talk a little bit about what you see and what you saw in last year's crime stats.
Well, it's not well. I mean, one homicide is one too many. But we've really tried
true.
to focus
Thank
on, you know, those crime drivers who are really causing the harm in the community. I have a crime strategies unit that helps me look at the data, look at the hot spots, look at where the shootings are, look at where gang activity is happening and really try to focus our resources in those particular areas in order to keep the violence down. So I'm glad that we had less homicides than we had last year, but we still had too many.
For you, when you look at those crime stats, then what do you do? I mean, you aside from being a district attorney, but you also want to prevent crimes. So when you looked at 2019 and looked at the numbers, what did you say to yourself? We've got to attend to this, this, or this.
Well, my job is not only prosecution, but it's also prevention. So we're doing a lot in our office to prevent violence, especially the violence brought about by the youth. We want to make sure that we have programs and resources in the community so that they can choose nonviolence over violence. One of the things that we established this year was the Saturday Night Lights program. It was in Manhattan previously, and it's now been spread to all 5 boroughs. And what that is, on Saturday nights, community centers are open for young people to have a place to gather, have a place to network, to learn leadership, sportsmanship, and to be out of the streets and getting into trouble.
I would say, you know, I've been doing this TV program for a long time, for 25 years, and I would say that the complaint I have heard most from parents and people in the community and community board leaders and elected officials, what are my kids doing after school? And incredibly, we're still having this dialogue. I know DYCD put some money to it last year. We have a clip of a program that you are running in Saturday Night Lights, so we'll show it. There were people there talk about how nice it is. I got to tell you, I did enjoy watching the DA play a little soccer. That was kind of nice with the kids. But let's take a look. So this comes from the Bronx District Attorney's Office and a little short piece of a video that they shot at Saturday Night Lights.
Yes.
Saturday night, playing soccer with the DA.
We've been running Saturday Night Lights program in East Harlem for 5 years, and we expanded to the Bronx for a reason that this program works. Our gym was packed. Kweku here is an example of someone who came from the South Bronx to our program in East Harlem, and he's since graduated and has helped us open up this gym here at Hostos Academy, the school where he graduated.
This is something that brings the community together because of like the love and the language of soccer. So I wanted to be able to like learn from that and also bring it to my community. So I've gotten a chance because of like NYCFC, CRTC, and Paul Jeffries to extend it and bring it to somewhere I'm known, like the Bronx. So like I'm trying to like also do my best and pay it forward to other people to have the same opportunities that I have right now.
Not only do the kids get to play soccer, but we also support them with pathways into becoming community coaches. There's summer employment opportunities for them. Kweku's actually an internship with New York City Football Club now, so he's getting to experience lots of different skills. And so that's our goal. In Harlem, it's last year we had 100% of the kids had graduated high school. So we help support with tutoring and SAT prep, but also just make sure that we provide the support and resources that they need for both college and career readiness.
Guest tonight on Bronx Talk is DA Darcel Clark. When you look at a program like that, and maybe it runs for a year, do you correlate it to crime numbers? Can you see an effect on crime numbers, or is it kind of too long-term to really be able to go to the next funder and say, hey, look what we did. We stopped robberies or youth crimes or things like that?
Well, it's too soon to tell because
Well,
we're
I
just
realize you just started.
we're just starting.
I meant
it.
long term.
But we see evidence even of the other programs that have been in Manhattan, where young people are getting together. These are young people who, at times, would not speak to each other on the street, or they were rivals. But you put them together in a soccer game or basketball, and somehow, those barriers come down and they're able to relate to each other. So it gives them a peaceful way to be competitive with each other rather than, violently competitive.
Years past in the borough of the Bronx, people, frankly, who are as old as I am, will remember that many of us went, in our neighborhood, we went to the same schools. Now the kids are all going to many different schools, whether it be at the high school level, even middle school level, et cetera, et cetera. So it's harder to create that kind of community between the young people than we had. Let's talk about gangs and the attraction for gangs for young people and what is being done, what should be done to prevent them from getting involved in these things.
Well, gangs is a big problem, as you know. During my 4 years, we've had a number of high-profile gang cases. I guess the one most notable was last year was the junior case. And that case is still going on, so I can't really talk about it. But 5 defendants have already been convicted on that case. And it's really just what can we do to prevent these kids from feeling like they need to join gangs. Some of them suffer from low self-esteem, they don't have jobs, poor education systems. We need to do more to concentrate on them before they pick up the gun. I've been working closely with some of the Cure Violence groups, the Stand Up to Violence, SOS, Save Our Streets, Release the Grip, Bragg. All of these resources in the community are credible messages that meet these young people where they are. And we're hoping that by them dialoguing with the young people, being part of the community, that they can stop them before they feel like they need to pick up the gun or the knife.
From where I sit, and we deal with, of course, all different issues on this program, and when I do a program on, let's say, our education system, and I hear a teacher say that 10% or in the Bronx, maybe even up to 20% of the young people attend school out of a shelter. Listen, we respect the parents and we love what the parents are doing and we know how hard they're working, but that kind of habit breeds somebody looking for a family elsewhere, and that family often comes, that family feeling comes through the wrong kinds of things. Let's just talk about weaponry. Guns in the Bronx. You feel like we're making inroads. Of course, New York has the toughest gun laws. Of course, guns come from elsewhere. Talk to me a little bit about, undoubtedly it's a concern. Are we doing better? Are we doing worse? Pretty much.
Well, we're working very hard on the gun cases in my office. I have dedicated assistants that work on the gun possession cases. And I got to tell you, I'm strict on guns because I have too much violence in the Bronx for me to feel that, it's just another one of those crimes that we could, just not focus on. I am laser focused on guns to the point that when people possess guns in the Bronx, although I'm teaching my assistants for the least restrictive sentence for somebody with guns, it's jail, it's prison, because I find there's no reason for somebody to possess an unlicensed gun. You possess guns if you're law enforcement, if you're security, if you have a license for it. If it's unlicensed, the only reason to have it is because you're a shooter or you've been shot. Either way, there's going to be harm to the community with these guns. And the guns fall into wrong hands. Sometimes kids pick them up, they get shot, they bring them to school, et cetera, et cetera. I'm very firm on guns.
And just back to the bail reform, so if I can interpret what you had just said, that somebody with a gun or with an unlicensed gun or an illegal firearm, you don't take to that too lightly.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's jail for anybody who possesses. Now, that's my policy, is 2 years in jail, 2 years post-release supervision, because the mandatory minimum is 3.5 years. So I'm still giving, some justice to that person to lessen the sentence if all the evidence is there. And of course now, with the discovery, I have to turn everything over so they'll actually see what kind of case I have against them, and they'll be able to make an informed decision. But just because that's my policy doesn't mean there's not exceptions. And there are times when there's an exception, and if we could work with that individual or work within the law on that exception, we will do so. But for, the basic policy is jail for guns.
A step back and looking, do you say, gee, I'm getting more cases of this nature than I've had before? Do you have a sense of that gun possession?
No,
I want to try and measure how we do.
No, there's more guns. There's more guns. There's more shootings. It's like you can't have shootings without guns. And whether we get them or not is a different story.
All right, I just took a deep breath there. I'm not happy to hear that. Let's talk about the new police commissioner.
All right, but before we do that,
sure.
Also with the guns, I have a gun trafficking unit as well, where we're working on the sale of guns in the Bronx as well. So we are trying to combat not only the possession, but people who bring those guns into our community in the first place.
Are they Bronxites who are selling them, or are they people from the outside who come here?
It's a little bit of both. Wow. People come from the Bronx, go out and get them and bring them in. other people come in and sell. We've had a lot of cases where we dealt with that.
Of course, that's a national and interstate issue. Of course, if you were not in the position you were in, and in a an outside position, maybe you could affect that more directly.
Well, we have the strictest laws. One of the states that have the strictest laws in the country. So I'm thankful to be in New York, but we still, unfortunately, have the crime that's associated with it.
All right, now the new police commissioner. Dermot Shea has some roots in the Bronx, and what's been your interaction with him, and what's your sense different from the previous, from Commissioner O'Neill, or what do we have to look forward to?
Yeah, he's a different leader. I think that I had a good relationship with O'Neill. I had a good relationship with Bratton, and I think that I have a good relationship with Commissioner Shea. I'm thankful that he has Bronx roots, because I think that's something that we have in common, that we share. And when I speak to him about the problems in the Bronx, he can recognize what I'm talking about because he spent time here and knows about it. I think that Commissioner Shea is a visionary. He sees big picture. And I think that he is focusing on the right things. He knows that, NYPD is the best in the country, maybe in the world, and that we've done a lot of things right in New York to bring the crime numbers down, even though we had a slight uptick, but we're still the safest big city in America. But he also knows that now is the time to look at more prevention than enforcement. And I know for a fact, I've had conversations with him, have meetings with him, where he really wants to focus now on young people and the prevention of them coming into the criminal justice system. And
that certainly would sync up with what you have laid out here for your own agenda for 2020 and beyond for this year. Well, Commissioner, DA Darcel Clark, thank you so much. Not Commissioner yet. If you seek that, that'll be your own business. But no, we do appreciate having access to the Bronx District Attorney. We appreciate your time this evening. And we wish you a quiet 2020.
Thank you.
Less crime. More time to say, gee, nothing's going on. Wouldn't that be nice?
From your mouth to God's ear, Gary. Okay.
Well, we're doing the best we can. Thank you again so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Folks, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, email them to us at BronxTalk@BronxNet.org. You can send us a tweet at BronxTalk, post them on our Facebook page. And next week, switching gears totally, we'll bring in one of the world's foremost experts on the Middle East, and we'll review the latest relations between the U.S. and Iran, the prospects for wider conflict, and a range of other Middle East and political issues. Should be totally different from this, but important to all of us as well. Thanks to our producer, Helen Greenberg. Our director is Nick Marrero. We'll see you next week, and good night.